The night my mother told me to pack my things because my sister needed the room more, I stood there with a black trash bag in my hand and realized I had just been erased from my own home. Years later, she would show up at my door asking for help, exhausted and desperate, only to learn that the house she lost no longer belonged to her. It belonged to me. My name is Danielle Harper, and I was 26 years old the night my mother decided I was the easiest child to remove. That was the pattern in our family. My younger sister, Ava, was always the one who needed more patience, more understanding, more protection, more second chances. She was sensitive, according to my mother, fragile, going through a lot. And somehow those words gave everyone permission to build their lives around her feelings while stepping right over mine. I was the other kind of daughter, the practical one, the reliable one, the one who was always told to be mature, to stop overreacting, to understand the pressure everyone else was under. If Ava cried, the whole house adjusted. If I cried, I got told to lower my voice. So by the time I was 26, I had already spent years becoming smaller inside that house. I had learned to clean up my own pain before anyone could accuse me of making a mess. I had learned not to ask for too much. I had learned that in my family, love was often just another word for what they expected me to give up quietly. Still, I never thought my mother would actually take my room. Not like that. Not in one evening. Not with that tone. Not as if removing me from my own space was the most obvious, reasonable decision in the world. It happened in early November, just after Ava came back home again. That, again, mattered. By then, she had already blown through one apartment with a boyfriend who paid most of the rent. One short-lived office job she said was beneath her, and one dramatic friendship breakup that somehow became a family crisis for the rest of us. When she showed up at my mother's house with 3 suitcases, swollen eyes, and a story about being emotionally drained, my mother reacted the same way she always did. She opened her arms. Then she rearranged everyone else around the impact. At first, I thought Ava would stay in the guest room downstairs. It was small, but it was still a room. It had a bed, a dresser, a door that closed. I remember thinking maybe, for once, this would not become my problem. Maybe this one time my mother would help Ava without reaching into my life to fund the comfort. I should have known better. 3 nights later, I came home from work and found my bedroom door open. That alone made my stomach tighten. I stepped inside and stopped cold. Half my closet was empty. The framed photo on my dresser had been moved. My winter sweaters were folded into 2 cardboard boxes by the wall, and Ava was sitting cross-legged on my bed, scrolling through her phone like she had always belonged there. For a second, I genuinely thought I had walked into the wrong room. That is how surreal it felt. How violating. Like the air itself had shifted while I was gone. I looked at her, then at the boxes, then back at her. "What is this?" She barely looked up. Mom thought this would make more sense. I could hear my mother in the hallway before I saw her. "Danielle, don't start." That sentence hit me almost as hard as the room itself. Don't start. As if I were the disturbance. As if my shock was the inconvenience here. I turned around slowly. "Why are my things packed?" My mother crossed her arms. "Ava needs this room for a while." I laughed once because my body did not know what else to do. Then she can use the guest room. She's not staying in that tiny room when she's already struggling. And I am? My mother sighed, already irritated, already acting like I was delaying a plan that had been decided without me because, in her mind, of course it had been. "You can take the sofa for now," she said. "Or the basement room once we clear it out." I stared at her. The basement room was not a room. It was a damp storage space with a cracked window and no proper heat. Calling it a room was the kind of lie people tell when they want cruelty to sound practical. "You gave her my room," I said. "For now, you packed my things. because you drag everything out emotionally, and I knew this would turn into a scene. That was the moment the hurt really landed. Not when I saw Ava on my bed. Not even when I saw my clothes in boxes. When I realized my mother had planned it while I was gone because she knew I would object, and instead of taking that as a sign the decision was wrong, she took it as proof she should do it behind my back. Ava finally looked up then, annoyed more than embarrassed. "Can we not do this right now? I've had a horrible week." I turned to her. "You're sitting in my room." She rolled her eyes. "You're so dramatic." That word, dramatic, in our family, it meant hurt in a way that inconvenienced them. I looked at my mother one more time, still hoping for something. Hesitation, guilt, basic decency, anything. But her face was set, cold, certain. She had already decided who mattered more in this moment. And like always, it wasn't me. "So that's it?" I asked. "You just take my room and expect me to sleep wherever?" Her voice went flat. "If you don't like it, Danielle, then leave." The whole house went quiet. Even Ava looked up at that. And there it was. Clean. Final. Not compromise. Not temporary reshuffling. Not family stress. The truth. I was easier to push out than she was to disappoint. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to breathe through the pressure in my chest. Then I nodded once, because if I spoke too quickly, I was going to cry, and I refused to give them that in front of each other. "Fine," I said. I grabbed one of the trash bags from the hall closet and started stuffing clothes into it with shaking hands. Sweaters, jeans, underwear, a pair of shoes, my laptop charger, toiletries from the bathroom. I moved fast because staying still would have broken me. My mother did not stop me. Ava did not get off the bed. No one said, "Wait." No one said, "Don't go." No one said anything worth remembering. By the time I reached the front door, one trash bag was cutting into my fingers and one cardboard box was pressed against my hip. My whole life felt reduced to what I could carry in one trip. I turned once before leaving. My mother stood in the hallway with her arms folded. Ava had already gone back to her phone, and in that moment, something inside me changed. Because I finally understood that they were not asking me to share. They were asking me to disappear. I walked out anyway. I did not have anywhere graceful to go that night. That was the humiliating part people never talk about when families tell you to leave as if adulthood automatically comes with backup plans. I had a full-time job. Yes, I paid my share of bills, bought my own groceries, handled my own life. But I had still been living in that house because my mother always insisted it was smarter financially, while also making sure I never forgot it was her house first. I had saved some money, but not enough to turn a trash bag and one cardboard box into immediate stability before midnight. So I sat in my car for 20 minutes outside a gas station parking lot with tears drying stiff on my face, trying to think. I ended up calling my friend Nina. She answered half asleep, then fully awake the second she heard my voice. "Danielle, what happened?" I told her the short version because if I told the whole truth, I would start crying again and not stop. Ava moved in. Mom gave her my room, told me to leave. Nina was silent for 1 second too long, the kind of silence that happens when someone decent is trying not to say something unforgivable about your family. Then she said, "Come here." No hesitation, no inconvenience in her tone. "Just come here." I drove to her apartment with my headlights blurring through the last of my tears and carried my bag and box up 3 flights of stairs while my chest felt hollowed out. Nina opened the door in oversized pajamas and wrapped me in a hug before I even got fully inside. That was almost what broke me again. Not the kindness itself, but the contrast. How quickly she made room for me when my own mother had treated my existence like an obstacle to somebody else's comfort. I slept on Nina's couch for 6 nights. 6 days of waking up disoriented, trying to make myself useful so I would not feel like a burden. 6 days of folding blankets too neatly, buying coffee I could not really afford, and applying for rental listings during my lunch break at work with my stomach in knots. Nina kept telling me to stay longer, but I knew I couldn't. Not because she wanted me gone, because being a guest, no matter how loved, still keeps your body braced. I needed a door I could close without apology. During those 6 days, my mother did not call once. She texted on the second morning. "Let me know if you're coming by for the rest of your things." That was it. No, are you okay? No, this got out of hand. No, maybe we should talk. Just the logistics of my own erasure. I stared at the message so long Nina finally asked if I was all right. And I laughed in that brittle way people do when their hurt has gone too deep to sound soft anymore. "She sounds like I moved out for college," I said. That became my mother's version of the story almost immediately. I learned that within a week. My aunt called to ask if I had decided to get my own place, and there was something in her careful tone that told me she already knew more than she was admitting. Later, my cousin Marla sent me a text that read, "Heard things got tense. Hope you're not making this harder than it needs to be." That was when I understood my mother had already started rewriting. In her version, Ava had been in a delicate state. The household had been under pressure. I had overreacted. I had stormed out because I was sensitive about space. Maybe she even said I wanted independence anyway. Families like mine are very good at taking a wound they caused and narrating it like your personality flaw. The truth was uglier and simpler. I had been removed because I was the child most likely to leave without forcing anyone else to confront what they were doing. That was my role in that family. The one who adjusted, the one who made herself smaller, the one who could be trusted to absorb injustice and still answer politely when spoken to. My mother did not throw me out because she believed I had somewhere better to go. She threw me out because she believed I would disappear quietly enough to keep the peace around Ava. And she was right about one part. I did leave quietly, but not because she deserved my grace, because I had finally seen the shape of what she thought I was. This had not started with the room. That was just the moment I could no longer pretend not to understand the pattern. When we were kids, Ava got the bigger slice, the softer punishment, the warmer explanations. If she forgot something, she was overwhelmed. If I forgot something, I was careless. If she cried, my mother rushed toward her. If I cried, my mother told me not to be dramatic. Even birthdays had their hierarchy. One year, when I turned 16, my dinner got rescheduled because Ava had a meltdown over a friend canceling plans, and my mother said, "Family has to prioritize the one who's struggling most." I remember smiling like I understood. I remember telling everyone it was fine. I remember eating cold leftovers alone the next night because by then, the moment had passed, and nobody thought it mattered anymore. That was what my family did best. They made my disappointment sound mature. So yes, I found an apartment after that. A tiny one-bedroom with thin walls, weak water pressure, and a front door that stuck in humid weather. It was not glamorous. It was not some triumphant escape scene from a movie. I signed the lease with shaking hands and nearly emptied my savings paying the deposit. I bought mismatched kitchenware from a thrift store and slept on a mattress on the floor for 2 months, but every inch of that cramped apartment was mine. No one packed my things while I was gone. No one called my pain inconvenient. No one told me to disappear for someone easier to love. And somewhere between carrying secondhand dishes up the stairs and standing alone in that tiny kitchen eating noodles over the sink, I realized something that changed me. The worst thing my mother ever taught me was not how easy it was to be replaced. It was how normal she expected me to act about it. The first year after I left was not inspiring. I wish I could tell it in a cleaner way. Like being thrown out lit some immediate fire in me, and I rose from the ashes with perfect clarity and sharp heels and a 5-year plan. That would make a better montage. It just would not be true. The truth was messier. I was angry all the time, tired all the time, careful with every dollar in a way that made ordinary errands feel like math problems with emotional consequences. My apartment was small enough that I could stand in the kitchen and see almost the whole place at once. The radiator hissed like it was personally offended by winter. The ceiling leaked once during a storm, and I cried over it with a bucket in my hands because the sound of water hitting plastic at 2 in the morning felt like one humiliation too many. But I stayed. I paid my rent on time. I went to work. I came home. And little by little, the life that had begun in humiliation started becoming something steadier. I worked in property administration back then, mostly handling lease files, vendor scheduling, maintenance records, and the 1,000 invisible tasks that keep buildings running while other people complain about things they assume fix themselves. It was not glamorous work, but I was good at it. Good enough that after a year, my supervisor trusted me with more responsibility. Good enough that I started seeing how many people in real estate made entire careers off understanding systems, timing, negotiation, and other people's carelessness. That interested me, not the luxury part, not the flashy side, the structure of it, the way homes could be security for one person and power for another, the way ownership changed the tone of every conversation. I had grown up learning what it felt like to live in a house where the roof over your head could be used to remind you how temporary your place was. Maybe that was why I started paying attention to property the way other people pay attention to escape routes. At first, it was just curiosity. Reading listings at night, learning terms, watching neighborhoods shift. Then I took an online certification course, then another. I started asking better questions at work, volunteering for more complicated files, learning what happened when people refinanced badly, fell behind, panicked, sold fast, hid problems, waited too long. I was not just trying to survive anymore. I was studying the machinery. There was a deep satisfaction in that, not because I thought it would impress anyone at home. By then, I had stopped telling my family much of anything. Calls from my mother were rare, and when they came, they were always strange in their emotional weather, too casual, too neutral, as if nothing final had ever happened in that hallway. As if telling your daughter to leave because her sister needed her room more was just one of those family moments people stop mentioning out of convenience. Ava, meanwhile, stayed exactly where she had always been. At the center, at first, I heard updates through relatives. She was getting back on her feet, then taking time to heal, then figuring things out, which, translated from family language, usually meant she was still living in my old room while my mother kept reorganizing reality around her. Every time I heard something, I felt the old twist in my chest, but it no longer broke me the same way. Distance had started doing its work. Once you build a life outside the version of yourself your family assigned, their hierarchy begins to look less like truth and more like habit. That did not mean it stopped hurting. Sometimes I would drive past the old neighborhood on my way back from a showing or an errand and catch a glimpse of the street where I grew up. The house always hit me in the same place. The pale siding, the front steps, the upstairs window that used to be mine before it became Ava's, simply because she wanted it more, and my mother needed that wanting to matter. I never slowed down enough to stare, but I always felt it, like a bruise under weather. Still, my life kept moving. I got promoted, then I switched firms. Then I started making better money than I ever thought I would in my late 20s. Not rich, not dramatic, just stable in a way that felt almost luxurious after spending so much of my 20s afraid one bad month would flatten me. I learned to save without guilt. I bought furniture that matched. I stopped apologizing for saying no when someone wanted something from my time, energy, or wallet. I even laughed more. Real laughter. Not the careful kind you perform around people you do not trust with your whole self. What surprised me most was how much room opened up in me once I stopped living in constant emotional negotiation. No one was rolling their eyes at my boundaries. No one was measuring my worth against Ava's latest need. No one was expecting me to disappear for the sake of household peace. That peace became addictive. It also made me sharper. By the time I was 32, I had moved into a better apartment, built a solid savings cushion, and started investing in a quiet, disciplined way that would have bored most people and thrilled me. I was not chasing luxury. I was chasing security I controlled. The kind no one could revoke because a more favored daughter needed my room. That history still sat under everything, even when I did not name it. Especially when I did not name it. People love to say painful childhoods make you resilient. Sometimes they do. But often what they make you first is observant. They teach you where power lives, who gets to feel safe, who gets moved around, who gets called difficult for noticing. I had become very, very good at noticing. That was why, when the first whispers started about my mother's finances, I paid attention. It came through my Aunt Renee, of all people. During one of those stiff family calls that pretended we were still a normal group of adults, with a mildly awkward history, instead of a cracked foundation no one wanted to discuss honestly, she mentioned, too casually, that, "Your mother has had a rough year." I asked what that meant. A pause. Then, "Just house things. Bills. Repairs. Ava's had a hard time contributing." Of course she had. I said very little, but after the call, I sat at my kitchen table with my tea going cold and stared at nothing for a long time. House things, bills, repairs. Ava not contributing. I knew enough by then to hear the danger inside vague language. A few weeks later, I heard more. A refinance that had gone badly. Missed payments. A loan taken under pressure. Something about medical bills after a fall my mother had downplayed. Enough smoke to make me certain there was fire. And what struck me most was not the information itself. It was the timing. Because for the first time in years, I felt no rush to run in and save anyone. Only a cold, quiet awareness that the same house used to make me feel disposable was no longer stable enough to protect the people who had used it that way. And somewhere deep inside me, a door I had shut years ago began to creak back open. Not with grief this time, with possibility. The first time I saw the listing, I almost closed the tab before my brain fully caught up. It was late. I was still at my kitchen table with my laptop open, half working, half drifting through neighborhood listings the way I often did when I wanted to think, without calling it thinking. The address hit me before the photo did. Then the front image loaded. Pale siding, slightly warped front steps. The same hydrangea bushes my mother never trimmed properly, and something in my chest went tight and still. My childhood home was for sale, not publicly marketed in the polished, confident way stable homes are sold. No glowing language about a cherished family property. No carefully staged warmth. It was listed as distressed, price reduced, motivated seller. The photos were sparse. The description was cautious. The kind of listing people in my line of work learn to read for what it doesn't say. I sat there staring at it for a long time. The living room looked smaller than I remembered. The kitchen cabinets had new paint, but badly done. One bathroom shot was cropped so tightly it almost screamed plumbing issues. The upstairs hallway looked dim, and in one corner of a bedroom photo, I could see a crack in the wall that definitely had not been there when I lived there. A house tells the truth eventually, even when the people in it don't. The next morning, I pulled the records. That was the advantage of spending years learning the machinery. I knew where to look. I knew how to read the quiet signs of strain. There had been a refinance 2 years earlier, then another adjustment, then arrears, then legal filings. Not a dramatic collapse all at once, but the slow, stupid kind that comes from trying to hold together a lifestyle with denial and temporary fixes. I could see it unfolding in documents the way some people see illness in scans. My mother had borrowed against the house. Then she had borrowed against time. And now she had run out of both. I should have felt triumphant. I didn't. What I felt first was something stranger. A sharp, almost private sadness. Not for her exactly, but for the fact that the house itself had become what I always suspected it was. Unstable beneath the stories. My mother had used that place like a throne for years. Her rules, her authority, her space to rearrange people according to who mattered most that week. And now, even the structure she had ruled from was cracking under the weight of her decisions. I told myself to close the file and walk away. That would be the healthy choice. Right? Let it go. Let the past stay sold to whoever wanted a distressed property with plumbing issues and a tired roof. But I couldn't. Every time I tried to move on to something else, I found myself opening the documents again, scrolling the photos, looking at the upstairs hallway, looking at the bedroom that used to be mine, then Ava's, then probably just another room in a house none of them could afford to keep. A week later, the price dropped again. That was when the thought first came, quiet and dangerous. What if I bought it? I did not say that out loud for another 3 days, not even to myself. I let it move around in my head like something too irrational to name, but the more I examined it, the less irrational it felt. I had the money for a strong down payment. I knew the market. I understood distressed sales. I knew exactly what the repairs would likely cost. And even with the needed work, the numbers still made sense. But it wasn't just about numbers. That was the part I had to force myself to admit. It was about ownership, about the fact that the house my mother had once used as proof that I could be displaced at any moment no longer had to belong to the people who taught me that lesson. About the possibility of standing inside that property one day and knowing no one could pack my things. No one could fold their arms in a hallway and tell me to leave. No one could decide my place there depended on who needed me gone. I met with the agent under my LLC. No family names, no sentiment, just business. He walked me through the current state of the property, the urgency of the sale, the lender pressure behind the scenes. I listened, asked the right questions, kept my voice even. He had no idea I knew the house. No idea I knew the window that stuck in winter, the stair that creaked near the landing, the exact room where my mother had stood, and told me if I didn't like losing my space, I could leave. That anonymity mattered. I did not want gossip. I did not want interference. Most of all, I did not want my mother or Ava realizing what was happening before the papers were signed. I had no interest in making a scene. The drama had already happened years ago. This was something colder, cleaner, a transfer of power through documents they could not argue with and signatures they could not interrupt. When my offer was accepted, I sat alone in my car outside the office and just stared through the windshield. I expected victory. Instead, I felt my hands start shaking, because this was not just a purchase. It was a reversal so complete it almost made me dizzy. The house my mother had once used to teach me how disposable I was would soon belong to me by law. She still didn't know. Ava didn't know. As far as they understood it, the house was slipping away to some unnamed buyer, some distant consequence, some faceless end to a story they probably thought they still controlled. Only I knew the truth. And as I signed the final documents days later, one thought kept moving through me with terrible, perfect clarity. She threw me out of that house because she thought it was hers to use against me. She never imagined I would be the one to take it back. She came to my door on a Thursday evening in March, just after 7. While I was standing in my kitchen reheating soup and answering emails I had no real intention of finishing that night. At first, I almost didn't answer. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I had grown protective of my evenings in the way people do when they've spent too much of life being interrupted by other people's crises. My apartment was quiet. A lamp glowed near the bookshelf. Rain tapped lightly against the windows. It was one of those ordinary, peaceful evenings that used to feel impossible to me when I still lived inside a house where tension could change rooms faster than weather. Then the knock came again. Harder this time. Not impatient exactly. Desperate. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. For one strange second, my brain refused to make sense of what I was seeing. It was my mother. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Maybe. But structurally. Like something in her had folded inward from too many bad months in a row. Her coat was old and slightly damp at the shoulders. Her hair, once always fixed before she went anywhere, was pulled back carelessly. One hand gripped the strap of her purse like she needed it to stay upright. I just stood there, not out of cruelty, out of shock. In all the versions of this moment I might have imagined over the years, if I'd imagined it at all. My mother never looked like this. She looked angry, controlled, defensive, maybe tearful in a strategic way, but not worn down, not uncertain, not like someone who had run out of other doors. She knocked again and said my name. Danielle. My hand moved to the lock before I had fully decided what I was doing. When I opened the door, she looked relieved so quickly it almost made me step back. Mom, she swallowed. Can I come in? No apology, no explanation, no preamble, just the request. And what struck me most was not what she asked. It was the assumption beneath it, even now. Even after years of distance and one unforgettable night where she stood in a hallway and told me to leave if I didn't like being displaced. Even now, some part of her still believed I would make room first and sort out my pain later. Old habits survive longest in the people who benefit from them. I stepped aside anyway, not because I owed her comfort, because I wanted to hear her say it. She entered slowly, taking in my apartment with quick, careful glances. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, clean, intentional. There were framed prints on the wall, a real couch instead of the cheap one Nina had helped me haul in years earlier, plants near the windows, a dining table I loved because I had bought it without waiting for anyone's approval. My mother noticed all of it. I could see her noticing. The stability, the order, the life. It was probably the first time she had stood inside something I built after she helped push me out. She stayed near the entryway at first, then finally sat when I gestured toward the chair by the window. I remained standing. What happened? I asked. Her mouth tightened before she spoke, as if even now the hardest part was not the situation itself, but the humiliation of having to admit it to me. The house is gone, she said. I did not move. Not because I was surprised. I wasn't. I had known the closing date for weeks. I had the keys in my drawer. But hearing her say it out loud still landed somewhere deep and strange. Gone. The house she once wielded like authority. The house she thought would always be hers to reorganize around whichever daughter she preferred. Gone. She looked down at her hands. We had more time than people realized. Then everything came at once. I heard that too. Not I. Not Ava. We. The family word. Pulled out again, now that there was no more equity left to cushion it. Where's Ava? I asked. With a friend for tonight? She said quickly. And there was embarrassment in her voice this time, sharp and visible. She's trying to figure something out. Of course she was. Ava was always trying to figure something out after the damage was done. My mother looked up at me then, and for the first time since entering, she let the desperation show fully. I didn't know where else to go. There it was, the line that probably would have broken me once. A few years earlier, I might have heard those words and rushed straight past memory into duty. I might have forgotten the hallway, the boxes, the trash bag cutting into my fingers. the sound of my own front door closing behind me while she stayed inside with folded arms. I might have translated her need into proof that I still mattered. But standing there in my apartment, in a home no one could throw me out of, I felt something different. Not softness. Clarity. You had other people, I said. Her face changed. Not like this. No, not like this. Not when she needed real help. Real shelter. Real room. I let the silence stretch. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. So why are you here? Her eyes filled immediately, and I hated that some old part of me still reacted to that before my mind caught up. Because you've always been the one who could manage. You've always landed on your feet. I thought. She stopped. I almost laughed, but the sound would have come out too sharp. You've always landed on your feet? As if resilience had not been built out of being left without a choice. As if surviving what she did to me had somehow become evidence that I owed her the same shelter she denied me. My voice came out quieter than I felt. You thought I'd help. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I looked at her for a long moment, then walked to the sideboard near the kitchen and pulled a folder from the drawer. I brought it back, set it on the table between us, and watched confusion move across her face. What's that? She asked. I opened it and slid one sheet toward her. The final purchase record. The deed. The address at the top. Her eyes dropped to the page, skimmed once, then again more slowly. I watched the exact second understanding hit. Her whole body went still. The blood seemed to leave her face in one visible wave. She looked up at me, then back at the address, then at the buyer name under my company, then finally at me again, with something close to disbelief. I said it before she could. The house you threw me out of? My voice was calm, almost too calm. I own it now. She stared at me like the room had tilted. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The rain tapped against the windows. My soup cooled untouched in the kitchen. And across from me sat the woman who once believed she could make me homeless with a sentence, now learning that the home she lost had passed, legally and completely, into the hands of the daughter she thought would disappear. For a long moment, my mother didn't speak. She just sat there with the paper in her hands, staring at the address like it might rearrange itself into something less humiliating if she looked long enough. I watched her eyes move over the deed again, over the purchase record, over the company name she didn't recognize, and then back to me. The silence between us felt almost physical, tight and heavy and deserved. You bought it? She asked finally, but her voice had changed. It no longer sounded like my mother asking a question. It sounded like someone trying to understand the shape of a consequence too late to avoid it. Yes. When? A few weeks ago. She looked down again. So you knew. There was something strange about that sentence. Not accusation exactly. More like shock that I had been close enough to the situation to know and had still remained silent. As if silence had belonged to her all those years. Not to me. I knew the house was being lost, I said. I knew it before you came here. Her fingers tightened around the page. And you didn't say anything. I almost smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No one said anything to me when I lost my room. That landed. I saw it. Not like a full awakening. Not that. My mother was not the kind of woman who transformed in one clean, emotional moment just because reality cornered her. But it hit. It made her inhale differently. It made her sit back as if she had forgotten the story did not begin with this evening. Danielle, she said quietly, that was years ago. That sentence should have made me angry. Instead, it made me tired. Years ago. As if time automatically cleans cruelty. As if years passing meant the shape of what happened somehow changed. I leaned against the edge of the table and looked at her with a calm I had earned the hard way. Yes, I said. It was years ago. That's how long I've had to live with what you did. Her face tightened. I did what I had to do. There it was. Not regret, not apology. Just justification in a lower voice. I nodded once. For Ava, she was in a fragile place. And I wasn't? She looked away. That was the answer. I took a breath and kept going before I could lose the steadiness I'd fought for. You packed my things while I was gone. You gave her my room without even telling me first. And when I asked where I was supposed to sleep, you told me if I didn't like it, I could leave. My mother pressed her lips together. I didn't think you'd actually go. I laughed then, softly and without humor, because that may have been the most honest thing she'd said all night. Of course she hadn't thought I would actually go. That was the foundation of everything, wasn't it? She had spent my whole life assuming I would bend before things broke, that I would adjust, absorb, make the pain smaller so everyone else could stay comfortable. Even that night, she hadn't expected my absence. She had expected compliance. You thought I'd disappear quietly and still stay available. I said, that's not fair. I stared at her. No. What wasn't fair was teaching your daughter how easy it is to become homeless the moment family stops caring. Her eyes filled then. Real tears this time. But they didn't move me the way they once would have. Maybe because I had finally learned that tears and accountability are not the same thing. Maybe because I had cried enough for both of us years ago. I came here because I had nowhere else, she whispered. And there it was again. The plea beneath everything else. The part she thought might still unlock me. I didn't sit. I didn't soften. I just asked the question that mattered. Did you come because you missed me? Or because I became useful again? That one hurt her. Good. She looked at me like I had said something too cruel to be true. But we both knew better. She had not come to reconnect. She had not shown up on some random Tuesday over the years to ask how I'd survived after leaving that house with a trash bag in my hand. She hadn't appeared to say she was wrong. She came now. At my door. After the house was gone. Because my stability finally mattered more than her pride. When she spoke again, her voice was thin. We are still family. I closed the folder and set it aside. You only say that when you need something. She flinched. I kept going. You didn't need me when Ava needed my room. You didn't need me when I was sleeping on Nina's couch trying to pretend I wasn't humiliated. You didn't need me when I was rebuilding my life from a one-bedroom apartment and a nearly empty savings account. But now the house is gone. Ava is unstable. And suddenly I'm family again. My mother wiped at her face. You make me sound heartless. I looked her straight in the eye. You were... That sat between us for a long time. The rain outside had softened to a faint tapping. My kitchen had gone quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's door opened and shut. Ordinary sounds, steady sounds. The kind that reminded me this was my home, my space, my choice. She looked older than I had ever seen her. Not because of the lines in her face, because power had left the room. And maybe that was the hardest thing for her to understand. She was asking for mercy from the daughter she had raised on none. I did not let my mother stay that night. That is the part some people would judge first, especially the kind of people who believe daughters should offer softness on command, no matter what was done to them before. I know how the story could sound in other mouths. Your mother was desperate. She had nowhere else to go. You had space. You had resources. You could have been the bigger person. But I had been the bigger person for most of my life. That was the problem. Being the bigger person in my family had always meant swallowing pain quickly enough to make someone else's bad behavior survivable. It meant being flexible when others were selfish. Calm when others were cruel. Understanding when others were entitled. It meant shrinking in ways people called maturity because it was more comfortable than naming what they were asking of me. I was done confusing self-erasure with kindness, so I gave her what I could live with. I called a hotel 15 minutes away and paid for 3 nights in advance. Nothing luxurious, but safe, clean, warm, and immediate. I also gave her the number of a housing attorney I trusted, and the name of a financial counselor who handled transition cases after distressed property loss. It was more practical help than anyone had given me the night I left with a trash bag and nowhere graceful to go. When I handed her the printed reservation, she looked at it, then at me, and I could see the conflict passing through her face. Relief, shame, disappointment that I was helping, but not surrendering. She wanted rescue. I offered structure. "You won't let me stay here?" she asked. The old version of me might have heard that as heartbreak. The new one heard it for what it was. Disbelief that I had boundaries even now. Even with her needs sitting visibly between us. "No," I said. Her mouth tightened. "After everything," I stopped her with one look. "Be careful with that sentence." Silence. She knew why. Because after everything was family language for debt that only moved in one direction. It never meant after everything you did to me. It meant after everything I'm asking you to forget so I can ask for more. She looked down at the hotel confirmation again and nodded once. Small and stiff. All right. I drove her there myself. Not because we had suddenly become tender with each other. We hadn't. The drive was mostly quiet. Streetlights moved across the windshield in soft intervals, while my mother sat in the passenger seat with both hands folded over her purse, looking out the window like she was trying not to see too much at once. There was no dramatic apology, no sudden confession, just the strange, raw silence that comes after years of power shift in one evening. When we reached the hotel, I parked and helped carry her bag inside. At the front desk, she thanked me quietly. It was such a simple sentence. So ordinary. But in my family, gratitude from the top down had always been rare enough to feel almost foreign. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and for one brief moment I saw not only the mother who had failed me, but also a woman standing in the ruins of choices she had spent years defending. I did not forgive her in that moment, but I saw her clearly. And maybe that was enough. Over the next few weeks, things settled into an uneasy shape. Ava moved in with a friend, then out again, then in with a man she met too quickly and trusted too much. Some patterns never evolve, they just change addresses. My mother found a small rental with help from the counselor I connected her to. She never thanked me for that part directly, but she followed through, which was more than I expected. We spoke occasionally, carefully, like two people walking across ice that had already cracked once, and might again. Meanwhile, I took possession of the house. That first day alone inside it, keys in my hand, was stranger than I expected. I thought I would feel victorious. Instead, I felt still. The room smelled faintly of dust and old paint. The kitchen had more damage than the listing showed. The upstairs hallway looked narrower than I remembered. When I stepped into what had once been my room, then Ava's, then just another staged image on a distressed sale listing, I stood there for a long time without moving. The light came through the same window. The floor still creaked in the same place near the closet. And there I was, 34 years old. Successful enough to buy the property outright through the structure I had built after being told to leave, standing in the exact room I had once been taught I had no right to keep. I sat on the bare floor and cried, not because I wanted the past back, because I didn't. I cried for the girl who left quietly so no one could accuse her of making things harder. For the years I spent treating that night like an isolated cruelty instead of the clearest proof of my place in the family. For the way I had once thought losing that room meant losing home, it didn't. That was what time had finally taught me. A room can be taken, a house can be lost. But home is not the place where people make you prove you deserve shelter. Home is what you build after you survive that lesson. I renovated the property slowly, intentionally, not to erase what happened there, but to reclaim the terms of it. I fixed the cracked wall, replaced the worn carpet upstairs with hardwood, opened the old storage room, and turned it into a proper office. Painted the bedroom that used to be mine in a soft, warm color my mother would have called impractical. I made decisions in that house without fear for the first time in its history. That mattered more than ownership papers ever could. Months later, my mother came by once to drop off a box of old photographs she had found while packing. She stood awkwardly in the doorway while I held the box and looked past me into the entryway. Her old house. My house now. The shift still seemed to disorient her. "It looks different," she said. "It is," she nodded. Then, after a pause, she said something I never expected from her. "I didn't think you'd build all this." The sentence was not perfect. It wasn't an apology. It still carried the old instinct to frame my strength as something surprising, something slightly outside the version of me she had authorized. But it was honest in a way most of her words had never been. I looked at her and answered with the truth she had earned. "You never thought I'd leave for real either." She lowered her eyes. No argument, no correction, just silence. That silence was better than excuses. Years ago, the night she told me to leave, I thought she was taking everything from me. My room, my place, my belonging, my last claim to being treated like someone who mattered in that house. I remember walking out with a trash bag digging into my fingers, feeling so humiliated I could barely breathe, and believing that was the lowest shape my life would ever take. I was wrong. It was not the end of my life. It was the end of my illusion. The illusion that if I stayed quiet enough, gave enough, understood enough, one day my family would choose me without needing something first. They didn't, so I chose myself. And that is why, when people ask me now whether buying the house was revenge, I always think they're asking the wrong question. Revenge is about punishment. This was about return. Returning to the place where I had once been made to feel disposable and standing there, years later, with proof that my survival did not depend on anyone's permission. Returning to the structure that had been used to diminish me and turning it into something governed by my own choices. Returning not as the daughter waiting to be kept, but as the woman who could keep herself. My mother thought the house was her power. It never was. Her power came from believing I would always accept less room, less protection, less care, and still stay loyal to the system that gave it to me. The night she told me to leave, she thought she was teaching me my place. She just never imagined I would learn that my place was somewhere she could no longer control. And in the end, that was the house I really built.